After being pregnant for 11 months, Tommy finally gave birth to a beautiful baby girl. The nurses quickly took the baby to examine. But suddenly, something strange started to happen. Large blobs began to surround the baby. And despite the nurses' efforts to pretend it was normal, the scene became increasingly terrifying as seconds passed. The entire body of the baby was now covered with flies buzzing loudly, terrifying the nurses, who abandoned the baby and watched from afar. Tommy, the baby's mother, felt something was wrong seeing the nurses standing in a corner staring at her child. Tommy weakly sat up, her heart pounding wildly, noticing the frightened whispers of the nurses and their refusal to approach her child. Her husband, Femi, had gone to fetch some essentials for the baby. "What is happening?" Tommy asked the nurses, who told her there was a problem with her baby. "We have never seen anything like this," they said to Tommy, who got up with difficulty to go see her child. Her eyes widened in shock when she saw her newborn covered with strange flies. Tommy immediately grabbed her baby and started swatting away the flies. It took him a few minutes, but they eventually disappeared, leaving Tommy alone to care for his newborn. All the nurses were too scared to come closer. They stayed at a distance, whispering among themselves and exchanging frightened glances toward Tommy, who was now holding her baby against her, her hands trembling as she rocked her crying child to sleep. Shortly after, the baby stopped crying and Tommy held him against her chest, murmuring prayers for him. Tommy knew, deep down, that there was something strange about her baby, but she refused to subject her child to the cold stares and judgments of the nurses or anyone else. It was her first child, her miracle after a long and difficult pregnancy, and Tommy decided to protect him at all costs. A few moments later, her husband Femi returned, arms full of groceries and a joyful smile on his face. "How is my little princess?" he asked, as he entered the room to see their baby. The joy on his face at that moment made it difficult for Tommy to talk to him about the flies. She pretended everything was fine and watched him carry the baby in his arms. Her heart was pounding as she wondered if the flies would return or if Femi would notice the strange discomfort that had overtaken the nurses. But nothing happened. The baby slept peacefully in Femi's arms, her tiny fingers curling around his as he gently rocked her to sleep. Tommy watched silently, his mind swirling with questions and fear. Could it be that what she had seen was just a passing anomaly? Or was it something much darker, something she didn't yet understand? She decided to remain silent, at least for now, not wanting to tarnish Femi's happiness, nor fuel the nurse's palpable fear. Days passed and nothing unusual happened. The hospital allowed Tommy to go home with her baby, wrapped in a soft blanket. They arrived home and Tommy was greeted by her husband's mother, who had come to take care of the baby. Tommy couldn't hide her displeasure. They had agreed that her own mother would come to take care of the baby. Thus, seeing her husband's mother standing at the door with a smile caused a wave of frustration. Tommy forced a smile as she watched her approach. Mother Femi stepped forward, arms open, to welcome her little child home. She didn't give Tommy time to speak before taking the baby in her arms. "Oh, look at her. She is so beautiful, just like her father," she said, showering the baby with praises and blessings. Tommy didn't understand why she had insisted on coming, knowing that it was the wife's mother's role to take care of the baby in situations like this. She had already been to all her daughters' homes to take care of their babies, and was now insisting on taking care of her son's baby, knowing that this role belonged to the wife's mother. Tommy forced himself to stay calm while his mother-in-law rocked the baby to sleep. "My little girl is really special," she said, her eyes fixed on the baby. Tommy looked at her angrily, his discomfort growing with each passing minute. She tried to hide her discontent, but her heart was too heavy to contain it. "Mom, my mother had already planned to come take care of the baby. It's her first grandchild, and although I'm glad you're here, I would have preferred my mother to come," Tommy said to Mama Femi, who accused her of being disrespectful and rude. "You think you know everything, Tommy," she snapped sharply, her tone tinged with anger. "I am not here just as a grandmother. I am here to make sure my grandchild is well raised because I see that your mother failed to raise you properly." She left the room, leaving Tommy frozen, unable to respond. When night came, Tommy lay in bed with her baby by her side. Her mother-in-law, Mama Kemi, had withdrawn to her room after their heated argument, and Femi, unaware of the tension between his mother and his wife, fell asleep on the couch downstairs. Tommy fell into a deep sleep, but was awakened a few hours later by a strange noise. His eyes opened wide in amazement. His baby was floating in the air, surrounded again by flies. The buzzing of the flies was deafening, and the scene was terrifying. Tommy screamed in terror, her voice echoing throughout the house as she trembled with fear. Her husband, Femi, rushed into the room to understand why she was screaming, but was confronted with this terrifying sight. His eyes widened in terror as he brought a hand to his chest, unable to breathe. Mother, hearing the commotion, rushed to see what was happening and saw the baby suspended in the air, with flies buzzing around him. No one understood why this was happening, but it was obvious that it was not normal. The entire room was plunged into panic, everyone wondering what to do, when suddenly, the flies disappeared and the baby came back down onto the bed. The room remained silent, everyone watching the baby from a distance, unable to understand what had just happened. Makemi, without mincing words, declared that something was seriously wrong with that child. "I am sure it's you behind all this," she said to Tommy, accusing him of being a witch. "Tommy, I warned you that this girl you decided to marry was a witch, but you didn't listen to me. No, look at what she did to your child." Mama Kemi addressed Femi, who looked at his wife incredulously. Tommy remained frozen, tears streaming down her cheeks. She looked at her husband, hoping he would defend her against his mother. But Femi said nothing, his silence more painful than words. Mama Kemi continued her invectives, her voice full of venom. "God alone knows what you have done, my little child," she said to Tommy, who could not bear being accused of being a witch. She watched her mother-in-law take the baby away from her, warning her never to lay hands on the child again. "From now on, you will not touch this baby without my permission," said Mama Kemi, taking the baby away, indifferent to Tommy's feelings. Tommy stood frozen, heartbroken, as Mama Kemi disappeared into her room with the baby. Her husband Femi avoided her gaze, mumbling something about needing to think. Tommy couldn't believe what was happening. She was now treated like an outcast in her own home, stripped of her rights as a mother, and warned not to go near her daughter. Tommy spent the whole night crying. She remembered the challenges she faced during her 11-month pregnancy, and the pain she had to endure to give birth to her child. Tommy knew how much she loved her daughter. He couldn't believe that his mother-in-law was looking her in the eyes to accuse her of being possessed. Sitting there, broken, she listened to her daughter's cries, echoing in the hallway. Her heart was pounding as she wondered if the baby was okay. She got up and walked towards the source of the crying, arriving in front of her mother-in-law's room, which was locked. Tommy knocked for hours, pleading to see his baby. But his mother-in-law warned him to keep his evil hands away from her little child. Tommy's world collapsed as she stood in front of the closed door, begging Mama Kemi to let her see her child. Her voice broke with despair, but all she received was silence from the other side of the door. Defeated, she collapsed against the door, her tears soaking her nightgown. The night seemed endless, and Femi remained absent, secluded in his office downstairs. Tommy felt completely alone. Her thoughts were overwhelmed with fear and confusion. She wondered why all this was happening and what was wrong with her baby. The silence of her husband at such a critical moment only worsened the situation, and Tommy couldn't understand why her life had suddenly taken such a dark turn. When morning came, Tommy was awakened by her baby's cries. She rushed toward the cries and found a strange man holding her baby while reciting incantations. Her mother-in-law had invited a witch doctor to their home to perform a ritual on the baby. Tommy stood frozen on the threshold, heart pounding, seeing the man, dressed in rags adorned with cowrie shells and feathers, humming in a language she didn't understand. Her baby was lying on a straw mat, surrounded by strange objects, candles, chalk drawings, and bowls containing unidentified substances. Mama Kemi stood in a corner with her son, arms crossed, watching the man perform the ritual. Tommy couldn't believe what she was seeing. She screamed in frustration, asking what a marabout was doing in her house. Her mother-in-law looked at her and replied that, since she refused to confess, she had invited someone capable of dealing with the evil Tommy had brought into their family. Tommy, full of rage, rushed towards the witch doctor and snatched her baby from his hands, shouting for him to leave her house. She scattered all the objects he had placed around the baby, yelling and screaming for him to go. The marabout, mad with rage, raised his hand to cast a curse on her. But his evil spell backfired and he went mad in front of them and remained speechless, watching Tommy carry her child to her room. Mama Kimi was too terrified to stop her, wondering what kind of power Tommy possessed to drive a marabout mad. Even her husband, Femi, seemed terrified by what he had just seen. He stood frozen, watching the chaos that had just occurred. His mother, Mama Kimi, clutched her trembling chest, trying to understand what had happened. Tommy, however, did not stop to explain or argue. She took her baby to her room and locked the door behind her. Sitting on her bed, her arms trembling, she held her daughter close and whispered to her, "I won't let anyone harm you no matter what happens." Tommy, with a heavy heart and head full of questions, took his phone and called his mother. She explained everything that had happened, the accusations of witchcraft, the witch doctor, and the strange events around her baby. Without wasting a minute, her mother promised to come immediately to help. A few hours later, Tommy's mother arrived at her house. She found Mama Kemi sitting in the living room, her face marked by fear and worry. As for Femi, he was pacing back and forth, lost in his thoughts. The atmosphere was tense when Tommy's mother broke the silence. "What is happening here?" she asked in a firm voice full of authority. "What has my daughter done to deserve such treatment from you?" she added, looking at Femi and his mother, who startled upon seeing her. Without hesitation, Mama Kemi replied, "Ask your witch of a daughter what she did to my little child. Your daughter drove a marabout crazy right before our eyes, and you come here accusing us as if we are the problem." Tommy's mother glared at her. "Witch?" she said, outraged. "You are the only one to have invited a marabout into my daughter's house. If a marabout has become..." You should rather ask yourself why. Because the last time I checked, evil never triumphs over good. She turned away without waiting for a response and went to join Tommy in her room. Upon entering, she found a few flies hovering around her little girl. Her heart tightened. "It's Inzo," she said calmly to Tommy. "We need to go to church immediately." Tommy nodded without hesitation. She dressed quickly, wrapped her baby in a blanket, and left the room with her mother by her side. As they crossed the living room, Mama Kemi stood up abruptly. "Where do you think you are going with my little child?" she demanded. Tommy's mother replied firmly, "We are going to the church." Her voice was filled with authority, leaving no room for discussion. "Enough of this madness. It's time to seek God's intervention in this child's life." She grabbed her daughter's hand and headed for the door. Femi tried to speak to Tommy, but she cut him off, her voice trembling with emotion. "You did nothing to defend me. Neither me nor our baby, Femi. I won't stay here for more accusations and rituals. If you want to help us, come to the church. Shut tonight and otherwise stay out of my way." Femi cast a hesitant glance at his mother, who seemed offended, but he quickly made up his mind. "I'm coming with you," he said, grabbing his car keys to follow them. Mama Kemi, furious, crossed her arms. "Who told you that the church was the solution? What this child needs is deliverance, not useless prayers," Tommy's mother replied sharply. "Do you really think inviting a witch doctor was the solution? You have already put this child in danger with your reckless actions." If you really care about your little girl, come with us to pray. Otherwise, step aside and let those who truly care about her do what is necessary." Faced with this sharp response, Mama Kemi reluctantly followed them. They arrived at a massive church and were directed to the head pastor. The pastor, a calm and respectful man with an imposing presence, listened carefully to Tommy and his mother explain everything. The flies, the floating baby, the accusations, and even the matter about who had gone mad. The pastor nodded, his expression serious. "Place the baby on the altar," he ordered gently but firmly. Tommy gently laid his daughter on a soft cloth set on the altar, then held back, began to pray with intensity, his authoritative voice filling the church. The prayers became more and more fervent, and soon a dull hum filled the air. The flies reappeared, their buzzing growing louder as they swirled around the baby. The whole assembly, drawn by the prayers, watched in horror. Mama Kemi stepped back, terrified, and murmured, "I always knew this child was cursed." The pastor intensified his efforts, proclaiming that every curse or attack against this child must be broken in the name of Jesus. The flies were buzzing violently above the child, forming a dark moving cloud. The tension in the room was palpable. Suddenly the pastor asked, "Who gave you the blanket in which this child is wrapped?" Tommy turned to Femi, confused. "You said you bought it, didn't you?" Femi's face turned pale. He stammered, revealing that it was a gift. "Gift? From whom, Femi?" There was a long silence, then Femi lowered his eyes. "From Folu, my ex." The flies buzzed louder, as if reacting to this revelation. The buzzing of the flies became deafening, filling the entire church. The congregation gasped, shocked by this revelation. Tommy stared at Femi, incredulous. "A gift from your ex, Folu?" she repeated, her voice trembling with anger. Femi, unable to meet her gaze, responded timidly. She insisted. "It was just a gift for the baby. I didn't want to be rude, so I accepted it." Tommy's anger escalated. "You knew what she had done to us, the pain she caused, and despite that, you accepted this gift and didn't tell me anything about it." Femi tried to defend himself. "I didn't think it could be a problem. I am sorry." Tommy shook her head, tears of anger in her eyes. "No, Femi, you didn't think. You didn't think about me, about our baby, about what that could mean." The pastor raised his hand to calm the attention. "This is not the time to look for someone to blame. Bring me that blanket." Tommy, with trembling hands, unwrapped the blanket around her baby and handed it to the pastor. The flies seemed to follow the blanket as he placed it on the altar. At that moment, the atmosphere of the church became heavy, almost oppressive. A palpable tension arose as the pastor began to pray with more fervor. "Any weapon formed against this child, any curse attached to this object, must be destroyed in the name of Jesus," he proclaimed, pouring anointing oil on the blanket. The flies seemed to stir more, swirling around the altar in a chaotic dance, as if resisting the prayers. The light in the church flickered, and the congregation held its breath. Suddenly, the blanket caught fire spontaneously, burning with a brilliant intensity. The flames consumed the fabric without leaving ashes, while the flies disappeared one by one, their buzzing giving way to complete silence. A clear and powerful cry rose from the baby on the altar, a sound full of life and strength. The little girl cried, but this time her cry seemed to be a declaration of victory. The pastor turned to the family, his face radiant with relief. "The attack is over. This child is now free. But listen to me carefully. This attack was no accident. It was motivated by jealousy and revenge. Stay vigilant and anchored in prayer. Protect your home from all evil." The pastor's words resonated deeply. Tommy rushed toward his baby, taking her in his arms and crying with relief. Mama Kenny, who had watched the whole scene, seemed paralyzed. She stepped forward timidly, tears in her eyes. "Tommy, I owe you an apology," she said in a trembling voice. "I was wrongly judged. I let myself be blinded by my prejudices and accused an innocent woman." She lowered her eyes, visibly ashamed. "I am so sorry. I feel so guilty realizing that the same woman I wanted to see ruined, married, madness, is the one who caused all this harm. Can you forgive me? Tommy looked at her mother-in-law, her heart still heavy with recent wounds. But seeing the sincerity in Mama Kimi's eyes, she slowly nodded. I forgive you, Mama, she replied softly, but know that I will always protect my child, no matter what it takes. Mama Kimi nodded, visibly relieved, and promised to go home to allow Tommy's mother to take care of the baby. Femi stepped forward, guilt written on his face. Tommy, I'm sorry, he said in a low voice. I wasn't there to defend you, and I let my mother treat you unfairly. I know I hurt you, but I promise to do better, to protect you and our daughter. As I would have said, Tommy, though hurt, chose to forgive him as well, determined to rebuild their relationship for the sake of their family. The days that followed were marked by a new spirit of unity in the family. Mama Kemi went back home, leaving Tommy's mother to take care of the child. She also promised to treat Tommy better in the future and to build a relationship based on respect. Femi cut all contact with Folu permanently, blocking her numbers and vowing never to let such a mistake threaten his family again. Baby, now free from any evil influence, thrived under the love and care of his parents and maternal grandmother. The pastor continued to visit the family, reminding them of the importance of staying in prayer and protecting their home from negative influences. The lesson from this ordeal was clear. Always be cautious about the gifts you accept and the intentions behind seemingly innocent actions. Femi learned that his passivity and lack of discernment had caused a lot of suffering, and he understood that communication and trust are essential in a marriage. Mama Kemi realized that her hasty judgments and interference had endangered the well-being of her granddaughter. She learned to seek the truth before making accusations, and her change in attitude repaired the strained ties with Tommy. As for Tommy, despite the unjust accusations, she showed incredible strength and resilience, proving a mother's love and determination to protect her child. In the end, the family found healing and restoration through faith, forgiveness,